AU Athens, please. Celebrate together the victories of our liberation. Let us dedicate ourselves to rise together to defend. Be seated. Honorable Dr. Pea Musherenga, Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Your Excellency Mr. Dennis Francis, President of the 78th session of the United Nations General Assembly, Your Excellency Madam Hoplong Pororo, UN Resident Coordinator, and I recognize the Dean of Diplomatic Corps and all the heads of missions who are present, the Vice Chancellor of the Namibia University of Science and Technology. And I also like to recognize the presence of Madam Joan Guriras. Please give her a loud applause. We gather here today to this 20th Dr. Theo-Ben Gurirab Lecture Series on the role of the Summit of the Future in changing new paths for transforming the world, increased representation, and supporting meaningful youth engagement. My name is Jerobeam Shanika. I am the Deputy Executive Director, responsible for multilateral relations, and I welcome you tonight to this lecture series. A special welcome is also extended to those who are following the lecture series on our different virtual platforms, MIRCO Facebook Live, NBC live streaming, and other social platforms through which it is being broadcasted. Since the launching of the Dr. Theo-Ben Gurirab Lecture Series on the 31st of July 2017, which was launched by His Excellency the late Dr. Hage Jean Geigob, then President of the Republic of Namibia, the Ministry of International Relations and Cooperation has hosted 19th successful lecture series, aiming at involving the public on taking interest and shaping the policy on international relations and cooperation. Today, the Ministry of International Relations and Cooperation brings to you the 20th Theo-Ben Gurirab Lecture Series under the theme of the Summit of the Future. Namibia and Germany will co-facilitate the Summit of the Future, scheduled to take place on the 22nd of September, 22nd to 23rd of September 2024, during the 79th session of the United Nations General Assembly. The Summit of the Future is a high-level event that will use the convening power of the President of the General Assembly to forge new international consensus among world leaders and to renew trust in the multilateral system and to turbocharge the Sustainable Development Goal. Namibia's co-leadership of the international negotiation on this summit gives an impetus to the global effort to meet existing international commitments and to take concrete steps to respond to the emerging challenge and opportunities. It is my privilege to introduce the honored panelists joining us tonight to tackle the topic at hand. Here we have the Honorable Dr. Pea Musherenga, the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, and on his right is His Excellency Mr. Denis Francis, the President of the 78th session of the General Assembly. Now, without our audience, as well as the members of public turned in the live through the various platforms, you are welcome and free to participate in the comment section. I now call on Ambassador Pendananda. My apology, I did not recognize your presence, and you are mostly recognized. I now call on Ambassador Pendananda, the Executive Director in the Ministry of International Relations and Cooperation, to deliver a welcoming remarks. Ambassador Nanda.
I believe I don't have to touch the mic, but colleagues always refer to me as close to the ground. So I hope everyone can see me. Thank you, Director of Ceremonies, Honorable Dr. Pea Musherenga, Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Your Excellency, Ambassador Denis Francis, President of the 78th session of the United Nations General Assembly, Dr. Harold Namibia, Vice Chancellor of the University of Science and Technology, Madam Theo-Ben Gurirab, welcome, we recognize you as well. Madam Fororo, the UN rep in Namibia, esteemed faculty and staff of the University of Namibia University of Science and Technology, distinguished invited guests, esteemed youth, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I have the honor to welcome you all to this memorable event, the 20th Dr. Theo-Ben Gurirab Lecture Series. This lecture series are named after the late Dr. Theo-Ben Gurirab, the first Minister of Foreign Affairs, the second Prime Minister, and the second Speaker of the National Assembly, and a renowned diplomat of note. Dr. Theo-Ben Gurirab also served as the President of the 54th session of the United Nations General Assembly. Amongst his priorities at the United Nations were advocating for issues related to the reform of the United Nations Security Council, economic and social development, gender equality, and empowerment of women, health, education, science and technology, and of note, the Women, Peace and Security Agenda. Therefore, to recognize significant contribution of this revered statesman to nationhood agenda and to honor his legacy, the Ministry of International Relations and Cooperation initiated and named the lecture series after him. The lecture series provides an important platform to deliberate on issues of national priority, as well as contemporary, multilateral, and bilateral issues. Further, the lecture series provides an opportunity to interrogate and analyze the impact of ongoing global and social political dynamics on the realization of national development aspirations and/or programs, including inclusive, sustainable development, poverty eradication, climate change, migration, peace and security, amongst others. Ladies and gentlemen, It is our distinct honor and privilege to have in our midst today a special guest of note, His Excellency Ambassador Dennis Francis, President of the 78th session of the United Nations General Assembly. At this juncture, I wish to extend our warm welcome to you, Your Excellency, Ambassador Francis, and express our profound gratitude to you for accepting the invitation to be our guest speaker this evening. Ambassador Francis is visiting Namibia to engage with Namibian leadership and other relevant stakeholders and provide insight on the ongoing negotiations for the Summit of the Future, which Namibia is honored to co-host or to co-facilitate with Germany. We are equally honored by the presence of Honorable Dr. Pea Mushelenga, the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, who is passionate about youth matters, having been a student and youth leader in the past, and as such, continues to advocate for the involvement of youth, particularly their participation in decision-making processes. Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, the theme for today's Dr. Theo-Ben Gurirab Lecture Series, the role of the Summit of the Future in charting new paths for transforming the world, increased representation, and supporting meaningful youth engagement and empowerment, is timely and speaks not only to the objectives and expected outcomes of the Summit of the Future, but to Namibia's aspiration for youth engagement and empowerment. The Summit of the Future presents an avenue for the international community and the world leaders to forge new international consensus, establish a new global agreement on multilateral solutions, and pledge their commitments on how to deliver a better present and safeguard future. In essence, the summit aims to reinforce the work of the United Nations and global governance structures to better address old and new challenges, as well as serving as a watershed moment and a reminder to the international community of the need to fulfill the promise of current international development obligations, in particular, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. It is gravely concerning that with only a few years to go before 2030, only 12% of the Sustainable Development Goals are on track. As such, it is our sincere hope that the Summit of the Future will address the impediments and create conditions for which the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development can be readily achieved. Ladies and gentlemen, today's lecture presents a valuable opportunity for all of us present here, and especially the youth, to interrogate the challenges we face with the implementation of the SDGs, explore and devise relevant interventions to redress and/or mitigate the current state of affairs in order to realize the future we want. Our deliberations should deliver concrete and action-oriented takeaways, articulating the narrative that define the future we want for the youth, the future generations, and for all of us. With these few remarks, I wish to once again welcome you all to the 20th Dr. Theo-Ben Gurirab Lecture Series, and I'm confident that the discussions will be thought-provoking and informative. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Pendananda. Can we give him another round of applause? Merci beaucoup. Muchísimas gracias. Asante sana. Muito obrigado. Please, Ambassador, don't think I've forgotten. Thank you very much for that enlightening welcome, and I can see everybody start smiling now because they all feel welcomed. It is now my privilege to call upon Honorable Dr. Pea Musherenga, the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, to deliver his remarks. Honorable.
Thank you very much to our moderator, Ambassador Dr. Shanika, Your Excellency, Mr. Dennis Francis, President of the United Nations General Assembly, the Dean and members of the diplomatic corps, the Vice Chancellor of NAST, the Executive Director of the Ministry of International Relations and Cooperation, Ms. Joan Gurirab, distinguished invited guests, faculty and staff of NAST, students, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to welcome you all to the Theo-Ben Gurirab Lecture Series. I welcome His Excellency, Ambassador Dennis Francis, President of the 78th United Nations General Assembly, who has positively responded to my invitation to visit the Republic of Namibia ahead of the Summit of the Future, which Namibia is a co-facilitator. President Francis' leadership as President of the United Nations General Assembly is steering us towards a critical moment in our collective future. The United Nations General Assembly will include the Summit of the Future, which is co-facilitated by Namibia and Germany. The Summit of the Future, which is scheduled to take place from the 22nd to the 23rd September 2024 in New York, will produce a comprehensive document titled The Pact for the Future. The document is expected to support efforts made so far in implementing set programs aimed at addressing global challenges such as poverty, climate change, youth unemployment, gender and education inequality, which impact progress in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. As developing countries of the Global South, we must ensure that our voices are not only heard, but also that they shape the global agenda. It is our expectation that the Summit of the Future, initially proposed in the Secretary General's Our Common Agenda report, responds to the urgent call for advancing the 12 overarching commitments outlined in the UN 75 Declaration. This summit must be about restoring trust, bridging divides, and providing solutions to the challenges the world faces. The summit's purpose is clear: That is to enhance and invigorate our multilateral system to effectively and collectively address the many challenges that we face. This is not just about making new commitments, but reaffirming existing ones and ensuring that we meet our current targets. William Shakespeare once said, and I quote, "It is not in the stars to hold destiny, but in ourselves," unquote. Accordingly, the onus is upon the Global South, for which Namibia is part of, to rise and strive for a better global community and international system that guarantees, among others, a robust global governance, sustainable development, digital transformation, peace and security, economic development, and social welfare for all. A key focus of the pact is on sustainable development and financing. We must secure increased and effective financing for development and climate action. The classification of Namibia as an upper middle income country is negatively impacting on our national development plans, as the country is unable to access favorable financial assistance and aid to adequately address the challenge that we face as a nation. The Summit of the Future should therefore address international inequalities and ensure that developing countries have easy access to finance and favorable financing for their major national projects. There is a need to create a more inclusive and equitable international financial system that addresses the economic needs of all countries, particularly those most vulnerable and underdeveloped. The digital divide remains a significant barrier to global equity. The Global Digital Compact, a cornerstone of the summit, aims to harness digital technologies, including artificial intelligence, to benefit all humanity. We must ensure that these technologies are used to uplift and empower, not to deepen existing divides. Namibia expects to see concrete commitments to close the digital gap, particularly between urban and rural communities, ensuring that every nation and community can participate fully in the digital age. Youth and future generations remain central to our vision for a sustainable future. The Declaration on Future Generations seeks to expand and strengthen youth participation in global decision-making. But our vision must extend beyond youth to include children whose futures are mostly directly impacted by our decisions today. We must build institutions that anticipate and respond to future risks and challenges, ensuring a legacy of sustainability and equity. I wish to encourage the youth to be proactive, innovative, and engaging in all contemporary issues and aspects of various development programs to supplement government efforts aimed at ensuring youth representation and youth empowerment. Gender equality is another pillar of the summit outcome. As we negotiate the pact, we must prioritize gender from peace to security to sustainable development. Women and girls must be at the forefront of our efforts, not only as beneficiaries, but as leaders and decision makers. I'm proud to note that in this area, Namibia remains a global leader. The transformation of global governance is also essential. The summit offers an opportunity to re-energize the UN reform process and re-evaluate our current system to make it more representative and responsive to today's challenges. We advocate for the reforms of the Security Council and other UN organs to better reflect today's geopolitical realities. I seize this opportunity to urge all African nations and the broader global south to engage actively in these negotiations. Our collective voice is powerful and necessary to achieve a pact that ensures a transformation where we move to the center stage of international platform. We should maximize on securing a better destiny of our children, the future. In closing, I reiterate that Namibia stands ready to work with all nations and stakeholders to achieve the vision I've outlined. Your Excellency, Mr. Dennis Francis, once more, welcome to Namibia. We are looking forward to hearing more on this very important process from you. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Dr. Pea Mushirenga, for your remarks. And those who are following, I'm sure I will not summarize because I might end up diluting what the Honorable Minister has said. But there is one thing, the quote from Shakespeare: it is not in the star that we hold our destiny, but within ourselves. And this is what it's supposed to be. When we go to the summit of the future, it speaks well. I always say there are two ways as we approach the future. Ask ourselves, which path do we follow? Is it the path of that we have charted since 1945, or 2024 will chart a new path for peace, progress, and development, so that we can fulfill the word in the preamble of the Charter to promote social progress and better standard of life in larger freedom. So it is now my singular honor to invite His Excellency Ambassador Dennis Francis, President of the 78th session of the General Assembly. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted to have been invited to speak to you today under the auspices of the Dr. Theo-Ben Gurirab Lecture Series, thus permitting me the opportunity of honoring one of Africa's greatest sons, who, as it happens, also held the office of President of the General Assembly during its 54th session, a responsibility he is reported to have discharged with utmost dedication. Dr. Theo-Ben Gurirab's presidency coincided with the turn of the millennium and the adoption of the Millennium Development Goals in the year 2000, at a time when the world was eager to seize the boundless potential and bright promises of the future, even as it was deeply anxious about what that future would bring. During this auspicious period, he skillfully led the work of the General Assembly, and importantly, for this continent, with the Namibian delegation leading the charge in ensuring that the Millennium Declaration contained a dedicated chapter recognizing the special needs of Africa. He was passionately committed to the work of the United Nations, which he called a beacon for all worthy causes in the far corners of the world, especially among the poor and needy in the developing world, unquote. We are therefore, all of us, beneficiaries of the tireless work and dedication of many, such as him, who labored selflessly for the peace and prosperity that still eludes us today, and whose efforts we must not only cherish, but continue. As President of the General Assembly, I take this sentiment to heart. My dear friends, in the year 2020, as member states gathered to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, the world was at the time grappling with the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, which wreaked havoc on economies, health sectors, social services, and many other aspects of life, including here in Namibia. Just as when Theo-Ben Gurirab held the presidency of the General Assembly, the world faced an uncertain future and needed to be reminded of the purpose of multilateralism. That is, to harness our collective energies to resolve the myriad of global challenges and to advance the common good. It is against this background that Mr. Antonio Guterres, UN Secretary General, has put forward the Our Common Agenda report, outlining a far-reaching vision and ambitious set of recommendations for renewed global cooperation addressing current and future challenges to achieve a more equitable, sustainable, and peaceful world. One of the Secretary General's groundbreaking proposals is the Summit of the Future, which will be convened at the General Assembly in New York in September 2024. This historic and timely summit aims to reinvigorate our fledgling multilateral system and to boost international cooperation to ensure a sustainable, equitable, and peaceful future in the face of heightened geopolitical tensions and waning public confidence in the efficacy of the United Nations itself. The summit also seeks, strategically, to accelerate progress on the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, which, as you may be aware, is woefully off track, with only 6 years to the time frame of 2030. As the ongoing intergovernmental negotiations on the Summit of the Future move into high gear in New York, under the able co-facilitation of your own ambassador and a permanent representative in New York, His Excellency Neville Gertz, alongside his German counterpart, our expectation is that this summit will produce a package of 3 action-oriented transformative outcomes in the form of the Pact of the Future, a global digital compact, and a declaration for future generations. Dear friends, as I regularly remind audiences, the summit will not be an end in and of itself, but rather the first steps in a long and perhaps overdue journey to embark on meaningful reform of our global governance systems, including the multilateral system, to ensure it remains fit for purpose. Along the way, we must value and incorporate the expert contribution of all stakeholders, from civil society and the private sector to young people who, after all, have the greatest stake in the future. In that regard, we are acutely aware, with an estimated 63% of its population considered young, the future of the African continent and Namibia itself is contingent upon effectively harnessing the energy and creativity of this demographic cohort. This requires rapid scaling up of investments in and for young people, resulting in quality education and decent employment opportunities. Currently accounting for 16% of the global population, you, the world's young people, will number 1.3 billion by the year 2030. One of our most important responsibilities of our generation, therefore, is to ensure that you come of age in a world that protects and advances your interests, your rights and well-being, a world that is sustainable, peaceful, and prosperous, and one that recognizes and upholds the rule of law and views women's rights as human rights, a world you will be proud to bequeath to your own children someday. As world leaders, we must respect and cultivate the extraordinary potential of our young people by understanding that they are demanding a proper seat at the table and are eager to play, and indeed must play, an integral role in shaping the future they wish to see. Right here in Namibia, the dedication and courage of many young men and women who themselves went into exile and made countless sacrifices played a critical role in winning this country's liberation and independence. Globally, we recognize and celebrate the role and potential of youth in addressing today's pressing challenges, from peace and security to reducing poverty and hunger to solving the climate crisis, among other things. To support these efforts, the General Assembly has approved the establishment of the UN Youth Office, which now leads advocacy for youth issues across the United Nations Program of Work. As I mentioned, this enhanced advocacy will be timely to perfectly frame youth input into a transformative declaration on future generations, setting out a new vision for future generations and their rights. As President of the General Assembly, I am deeply committed to finding the right balance and to facilitating heightened engagement by the promising voices of the youth, while ensuring that they too respect the fundamental intergovernmental moorings of the negotiations. That is why I continued the PGA Fellowship Program, bringing independently selected young diplomats from the most vulnerable countries around the world to join my office as apprentices. This unique opportunity allows young diplomats to gain first-hand insight into the workings of multilateralism at the United Nations headquarters, and then return to enrich their country's foreign ministries and diplomatic ranks. I therefore encourage young people from developing countries to seek available opportunities to gain a deeper understanding of the General Assembly as the most democratic and universally representative body of the 193 member states. I have also endeavored to engage with youth wherever and whenever the opportunity arises, and was honored to host an event entitled Ask the PGA, a conversation with youth, in April, where I engage with young people on protecting the planet's ecosystems. My dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, as I stand before this young, dynamic audience of change makers, I wish to leave you with a few words of practical advice. First, remain faithful to your interests and passions. Stay motivated and stay engaged in your pursuits. Young globalists like you are already at the forefront of climate activism, social justice, and environmental sustainability and innovation. Speaking with young people like you fills me with immense hope for the future. You are not just tomorrow's leaders. You are thought leaders of today. Many of you will be future leaders, scientists, innovators, and stewards of the world. Embrace this role with vigor, honesty, and integrity. I am confident that all of you will, in time, rise to play a prominent role in taking your country, Namibia, and indeed the world, to new heights of accomplishment. Together we can and must build a better, more sustainable, and more just future for all. We can do it. Yes, we can. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for these inspiring remarks, and also to the advice given to the young generation. At this moment, I now invite our participants and those following on social media to pose their question on the topic at hand. But I want us to do it in a way that we do not prolong the discussions. When you pose your question, you introduce yourself. If you are coming from an organization, you introduce, or you also tell us which organization you represent, and then make your question briefly, or ask your question briefly. And for the benefit of, so that we don't ask too many questions, and then that will give the speakers a challenge to reflect on the question that were posed. I encourage that we ask maybe 3 questions, then we let the speakers to respond, after which we move to another set of questions. Then I now take, before I do that, I ask assistance from my colleagues, especially those from the Department of Information and Media Research, to kindly check on virtual platform, particularly on our Facebook, to see if there were questions that were asked, and bring those questions so that we can assist them to, or we can assist them to convey the question to our distinguished speakers. Now let me ask you to please give our 2 speakers a loud applause. Thank you very much. I now take a few questions at a time, and we will get the answer from the speakers, from the Honorable Minister and the President of the General Assembly. The floor is open. Yes, I see a hand at far end there. Can you please introduce yourself and proceed to ask the questions?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Megan Quais. I'm a computer science software engineering student here at NAST, and I'm a NANSO member and also a climate activist. My question was for the President of the UN. I wanted to ask, how can I, as the youth, be granted the opportunity to stand at the forefront and to do everything that you said? Because I don't see any opportunities presented to me here in Namibia to actually go out and get educated and come back and educate my youth, you get me? So I wanted to know how I can be placed there, or how a youth can be placed at the forefront and be educated to come educate the youth.
How a youth can be? Can you repeat your question?
The President of the UN stated that he invites the youth to get educated at the UN head office, if I'm not wrong. So I was like, how are Namibian youth presented the opportunity to get educated, to come, you know? Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. That is to the President of the General Assembly. The next question.
Good evening. My name is Michael Hashela. I'm with the Ministry of International Relations. It's not every day that we get the President of the UN General Assembly in Namibia, so thank you very much. My question is premised on the basis of saying peace and security are the prerequisites for a bright future. And going off that, Mr. President, can you kindly perhaps just, can you tell us how would you characterize the relationship between the UN General Assembly and the United Nations Security Council, particularly on issues of peace and security? During your tenure, we have seen the precipitation of two major conflicts, the one in Ukraine and the one in the Gaza Strip, and which have generated great interest in both bodies of the United Nations, but often with diametrically opposed outcomes. So can you just perhaps tell us about that relationship? Thank you.
Thank you. Another question? Yeah, there is one from online here. I do not know. This question is directed to who? How does Namibia stand to benefit from co-facilitating this summit? This question is directed to who? To both. Okay. Can I give the chance to the Honorable Minister and the President of the General Assembly to answer those three questions, so that then we can move to another set of questions? Please. Mr. President?
Do I need a mic, or I can just answer from here?
Is there a mic? So that we don't have our distinguished speaker standing up to respond to the questions.
Thank you. The young lady up at the top was inquiring about how she can avail herself of the opportunities to get at the forefront of the matters that she's interested in. Well, the first thing you have to do is to connect. You have to connect to the systems and to the places and spaces where those conversations are taking place. And much of it actually goes on online. So that's the first thing. But the more specific question that I think you're trying to get at was how you could avail yourself of the fellowships that we offer in the Office of the President of the General Assembly, which allows us to take in a limited number of young people from across the developing world. We train them for about 6 months, including assigning them to the offices of their country's missions in New York. We sometimes take them on field trips where the funds are available. This is extremely expensive business. This year, they would have gone to Geneva, Switzerland, to the Human Rights Council, which is an extremely important specialized agency of the United Nations. And this is an opportunity for young people to understand the inner workings of the United Nations systems and how the UN makes decisions on important global issues, because many people do not understand. It's sometimes a very complex, deliberative process. It is a very democratic process. It is a painstaking process. And that has led some people to accuse the UN of being like a slow and lazy donkey. It doesn't move fast enough. But when you're dealing with highly sensitive political issues and people's lives, you've got to be careful to deliberate in very, very careful ways, lest you do further damage. So the notifications about the fellowship normally come online. I would advise that you go to the website of the Office of the President of the General Assembly, and you will see some information there. But there are also other fellowships that I'm aware of in the UN system. AOSIS, which represents the group of small island developing states, also offers fellowships. I think every 2 years, and they would bring a group of maybe 6 or 8. It is highly competitive, so you've got to be up on your game, so to speak. And they do the similar thing. So the opportunities are there. It's competitive. It's not nearly enough, because like I say, it's extremely expensive. You're actually paid a stipend. You're given medical coverage, because you cannot be in a place like the United States without medical insurance, and that is expensive. But this gives you the foundation of what multilateralism is, how it functions, why sometimes things do not work out in what you think should be the logical pattern. So I encourage you to pursue it. The other question that was asked was, and I knew that there was an inevitability that this would come up because it's very topical. Let's start with the fundamentals. The Charter of the United Nations assigns primary responsibility for international peace and security to the United Nations Security Council. The Council consists of 15 members at any one point in time. 15. 5 of those members are called the permanent members. They are there in perpetuity. They will never not be there. The other 10 are elected. Every 2 years, there's an election to renew the council. But there are actually 2 categories of members in the Security Council. There's the permanent 5, who have an extraordinary power that the other 10 do not have. And that power is something we refer to as the power of the veto. They can, vested with that power, vote down any resolution coming to the Security Council that, in their view, is not worthy of being passed. So it is very easy for a situation to develop in the Security Council whereby there's an egregious humanitarian situation taking place somewhere on earth. And a resolution is brought to the council trying to get the council to pronounce and to take action on this, to declare its illegality and to demand that it be stopped. Remember, I said there are 15 votes, and 14 countries vote yes. But one country, a single country, one of the P5, votes no. Nothing happens. Nothing happens. Now, this has been the case from the inception of the Security Council in 1948. This is not new. In fact, it's old. The problem is, however, that in the contemporary era, in the last 3-4 years in particular, situations have arisen around the earth that demand a quick, effective response from the Security Council to stop the excesses that are being committed. and they've not been able to do it. Simply because one country, any one country, can vote it down. In other words, the manner in which the Security Council operates is 15 minus 1 leaves 0, not 14. Because that vote cancels any possibility that action would be taken to resolve that situation. And in the meantime, the fighting goes on, the murders go on, the bloodletting goes on, children are hungry, homeless, cold, they have nowhere to sleep, continues. All because of narrow geopolitical reasons. We've had difficulties in the past with the Council. Don't misunderstand. These issues are not new. But they've taken on a different dimension in the last maybe 5 to 10 years. Very different. Extremely different. And so there's a lot of frustration. There's frustration in the General Assembly, and there's frustration among the general public and among the people who follow the operations of the UN. Because the UN is a public institution. You pay for it. You may not even have been aware of that. You pay for it. So in principle, you have a right to demand results from it, because it's your tax dollars that keep it going. Now, so about 3 years ago, this pattern was repeating itself over and over. And about 3 years ago, a group of countries got together and decided something had to be done. We have to find a way to discourage the P5 from using the veto in an arbitrary manner. It cannot simply be that a resolution comes to the Council, it's a solid resolution, it attracts the support of the majority of members, and a single member, in order to protect its narrow geopolitical interests, votes down that resolution, leaving human beings open to the worst forms of all sorts of things, torture, murder. This doesn't seem to be right. People then ask legitimate questions. Well, why do we have a UN? If we are watching people being murdered every day on TV, can you imagine that young children in Gaza recently were having limbs and legs amputated without anesthetics? Young children, babies? When that could have been intercepted by a positive vote in the Security Council? That's what we're talking about. So this group of countries got together and determined something has to be done. The Security Council is appointed by the General Assembly because they're elected. We vote for the Security Council, except the P5. Nobody voted for them. They are prima donnas. In loose language, they are prima donnas because they were appointed at the very start. They are untouchables. And so they came up with something called the Veto Initiative, which requires any country using the veto in the Security Council, that process automatically triggers another process, which requires the veto-wielding country to come before the General Assembly and explain to the General Assembly why that country found it necessary and proper to use the veto. In other words, I am giving you powers to use this facility. I've never given it to you to use it arbitrarily. You cannot use it in a capricious way. And when you use it in ways that offend my sensibilities, you must come and explain to me why. Now, that is a new thing. That never happened before. Because these prima donnas now are being subject to censure. When it comes to the General Assembly, my responsibility as president is to organize a discussion, a debate. And in that debate, every member state has the right to take the floor and express its views on the use of the veto. So, those who use the veto, and it's a small group of them that tend to repeat, find themselves being lambasted in the General Assembly in the way that diplomats lambaste. You know, we're not abusive, but neither are we foolish. So we find the language to state that this behavior is unacceptable and, in fact, imperiling the image and reputation of the United Nations. Many questions have been raised in the media by the analysts as to why should there be a UN when the UN seems incapable of bringing these situations to a halt. Why are they creating expectations that they cannot fulfill? So this process has gone on now for about 3-4 years. The thing is, the initial impetus for the veto initiative was to discourage countries from using it. But it has not worked that way. It has not. Countries still seem to feel that where their narrow national interests, and this is the difference, because the Security Council's responsibility is to protect the common interest of all members of the international community in matters related to war and peace. It is not to elevate the narrow national interest of any individual state over the general interests of the entire international community. And so we are in a bit of a new phase in the relationship between the Council and the General Assembly. But what has this done? This has given the General Assembly a renewed sense of its own powers, because now the theater of action has actually shifted from the Security Council to the General Assembly. And this is creating other problems, as you can well imagine. Because as long as the veto is used, this automatic trigger happens. And that sets in motion a set of things that must happen by particular dates in order for us to host this debate. It's a transparency mechanism, which is good, because there had been a view, not illegitimate view, that the work of the Security Council had not been sufficiently transparent before. It needed to be more transparent because the Security Council is a creature of the General Assembly, and therefore it must report in good faith what it is doing so that members of the General Assembly are aware and can make contributions or assessments of that work. In terms of relations, the relations are fine. The President of the Security Council and I meet on a monthly basis. We sit down and discuss the issues that he has on his agenda, and sometimes it relates to issues on my agenda. So institutionally, the relationships are fine. The rub is in the use of the veto and how that impacts the image and reputation of the organization. It took the General Assembly in October about 2 weeks, I think it was, to pass the first UN resolution on Gaza. Very strong resolution. Up to that time, the Security Council had vetoed, I believe, something in the order of 3 or 4 resolutions on Gaza. It wasn't until the General Assembly passed its first strong resolution on Gaza, calling for, and we did not demand any temporary ceasefire. We demanded ceasefire because our objective was to save lives, stop the bloodletting, which we did not think was necessary, to provide humanitarian aid and support to all those who needed it, and first and foremost, to release all the hostages unconditionally, because they ought never to have been captured. Very strong resolution. It wasn't until the General Assembly did that that the Security Council, 3 weeks later, under the Chinese presidency, was able to pass its first resolution on Gaza. People are observing this and thinking, wait a minute, the Security Council is not doing its job. It seems as if the General Assembly is better positioned to act in these matters. Now, but hold up, don't go there too fast, because everything that is done must be done legally. The General Assembly does have residual responsibility in the Charter for matters of peace and security. Residual. The primary responsibility rests with the Council. So when the Council fails, it trips over to us. And thankfully, the Council is willing and able to act and has in large measure salvaged some of the reputation of the United Nations. So there's your answer. I'm sorry to be so long, but it is a bit complex.
Thank you very much. Now, class. Honorable Dr. Pea Mushiringa, if you can respond to the question, particularly the one that how does Namibia stand to benefit from co-facilitating the Summit of the Future?
Thank you very much. To be a co-facilitator, to have been selected among 193 member states, first is a great honor. And then as a co-facilitator, you are also involved in the negotiation process. Not only that you are able to gauge the feelings of the member states during the negotiation process, but also that you are able to influence the process and the outcome thereof. So as a country, part of the global south, we have engaged others. We have been part and parcel of this process. We have our own challenge individually as a country. We have challenges that we know as part of the global south that we are bringing in the negotiation process to be part of the outcome all those areas that we are talking about, peace and security, you know, issues of digital transformation and so forth, are the issues that we can pride to say we are able to influence the process. And I want to take you back to history. Before the adoption of the Millennium Declaration, you know, we held the presidency of the United Nations General Assembly. We were also part of the process of negotiation, and there were issues that we were able to influence. We had staff members at our mission that were working day and night to ensure that the outcome of that declaration also reflected the aspirations not only of Namibians but of the developing countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please, can we give an applause? I just want to appeal for the benefit of time. If the question has been answered, please don't repeat it again. Move to those questions that have not been answered so that we'll be able to have an opportunity to tackle as many questions as we can. I have here, I see 3 hands, and I have a couple of questions online that I will. Let me first take a question from this side, and then there's a hand here, and there's another hand on this side. Actually, 2, because I think that there are too many questions from this side. So we must, equitable. We are talking of equitable geographical distribution or representation. So now if we are only one-sided, we are repeating what was just explained here. Yes, please go ahead and ask your question.
Well,
introduce yourself.
To all your excellencies and everyone here, good evening. I'm called Muisa Nyunyu Keynes, and I'm a youth from Congo, DRC. And my question was, how can the UN Council that you represent boost the trust that a Congolese youth should have in UN when the youth in Congo feels left out? Because we are here, we are talking about many things, and even in your examples, you are citing Gaza, but in Congo, the youth is suffering a lot, and it's known from everyone now. So if one voice can put down a resolution in UN, why can't the fate of one country among the 193 also matter? Why does it not matter?
Okay, I think you made your point. The next question. There is one. Please, can you put up your hands, those who. Yes, one day. And please come to this side. Equitable distribution.
Yes, my name is Peterson Nyananya from the University of Namibia, and currently at the Student Representative Council as a Chief for External Affairs. So my question goes to the President. He spoke on multilateralism, looking at areas that now that we are having a global changing landscape, and we have factors such as populism and nationalism which can affect the effectiveness of multilateralism. How does the summit of the future, what grounds do they have in place, making sure that multilateralism adapts to the rapidly changing world? Thank you.
Thank you. Please come this side. This side, this side. Yes, I see you. Don't worry, I have not forgotten you. We want to go as far as we can on this right side.
I greet everyone, and Mr. President, I greet you. My name is Shea Nangombe, and my question is rather in the abstract. I wanted to pose this question yesterday when we met with Nanso, and I posed it again on the Ask PGA website, and it's gonna be a short. I've seen the way people live, especially in Namibia, and you mentioned Gaza and Congo and all those places. And what's important to me, you spoke about human dignity and hope. And my question, Mr. President, is how do we stand for hope when everything seems almost against us? You know, how do we stand in the light when everything seems as if it's not going our way? So just briefly, how do we stand for hope?
We understand you want to know how you can stand in hope. Can you please allow the President and the Minister to answer the questions? And I just appeal to the Minister and the President to answer briefly, because there are many questions that are coming, so that we can accommodate them. I know there is another program that we are going to engage.
I want to take this question over here first, because it is not an uncommon question, and it is not an uncommon sentiment. There's a lot of bad news going around the world. In fact, much of it is depressing. You turn on the TV, people are dying in front of your eyes. And their human remains are not being treated with dignity and respect. So some of the values on which our societies have been built seem to be going further and further away. There's a lot that is wrong in the world that needs to be fixed. There's no doubt about it. It cannot be acceptable in a world where one man, a single man, can purchase a social media company for $41 billion. But there are 1 billion hungry people on this planet who do not know where breakfast is coming from tomorrow. Something is fundamentally wrong. It cannot be correct that after all of the work on the SDGs to get rid of poverty, we still have approximately 1 billion people living in abject poverty, cannot feed their children, cannot send them to school. Poverty is not a choice. If it were a choice, do you think it would exist? So you have a lot to be despaired about. But we are also human. We get up and fight. We fight for the things we believe in. We fight for what is right and to make it right. We fight because if we don't fight, we lose. And losing is not an option in certain things. And so we fight. We push back because we are empowered. I'm not sure whether you said whether you're a student here. Are you a student here? Yes. In what field? Travel and tourism. Do you know that you're privileged? As the world goes, you're privileged. There are many places in the world where people would love the opportunity you have. At least you're getting an education. It might take you a little while to find the job that you want. So you must not look at the glass as half empty. Look at it as half full and work towards filling it up. It might take you time. I'm not saying it's easy to do. When I graduated university, maybe 40 years ago, I was being driven crazy. I was sitting around at home, couldn't find a job. I had a brilliant degree, could not find a job. So we had an orange tree in the yard. And every morning I would get up and have fresh squeezed orange juice. I thought life was great. It took me 6 months to find a job. But guess what? In that 1 week, I had 3 job offers. From nothing for 6 months to 3 in 1 week. When the time is right, when the moment is right, something will happen to lift you. If you keep the faith. You cannot give up, because that's when you lose. I'm sorry, the other question. Something on multilateralism? Over here? Oh. What was your question, sir? Uh-huh. The Summit of the Future is really going to be unlike any other diplomatic process that the UN has organized before. Do you know the UN is an intergovernmental organization. It's an organization made up of sovereign states. You have to be a sovereign state in order to be a full member. That's a basic requirement. The agreements that are entered into at the UN, the legal agreements, can only be signed by states, by sovereign states, because other persons who might make a contribution do not have what is described as legal personality in law. They have no legal powers under international law. The Summit of the Future is multidimensional in several ways, because governments have come to the realization over time that the best agreements, the ones that really get to the heart of the problems and create the solutions that we need, are the ones that are structured to include players other than governments themselves. So the governments are key players, but other stakeholders need to make contributions. And those stakeholders come from society. It's civil society groups who have been working in the field for decades and decades on social, sometimes environmental issues, and who have amassed a large stock of information, evidence-based information. They know what works, what doesn't work. They know the circumstances in which to apply it before, in a way that a bureaucrat sitting in an office in New York will never be able to, because he or she is a desk researcher. The private sector, big organizations, they have a lot of information and insight. The philanthropic community, people are doing work. Sometimes it's just an individual doing research, or in groups, or something called civil society organizations. Organizations like, it'll come to me just now. Anyway, these people are out in the field making interventions to deal with poverty, poor drainage, poor sanitation, hunger, education, kids who can't go to school because they have to go to work. In some countries in the world, kids cannot go to school because they have to go to work illegally. So when I say you're privileged, that's what I'm talking about. Young children who have to walk 10 and 15 miles to get water to take back to their mother's house so that she can prepare a meal because no one else to do it. They've got to work. See, everything is relative. So now all of these voices are making contributions to the Summit of the Future process, including one of the most important being the youth, because the future is about youth. And so last month in Nairobi, the UN organized a youth conference, a civil society conference, including the youth. It was exclusively for youth, over a 3-day period, to sit down and determine what their contribution is going to be. What would they like to see reflected in the outcome documents for the Summit of the Future? So youth will have an opportunity to say to heads of government, you know, you are emphasizing X or Y, but from where we sit, we need to see action on E, F, and G as well. And all of this will come together in the context of something called the Pact of the Future. Yes, Ambassador, that's the end of my answer.
Thank you very much. I think there was a question that was asked by Congo.
Yes, and I'd like to answer it. I'm not a specialist on Congo. I do not know the details. And I'm not saying that in order to weasel out of the questions. That is not who I am. And I can understand your frustration because it's not unique. But the minute you take the line that your life does not matter, you're going down the wrong road. Because your life does matter. That is why the UN has been trying to take action to force these conflicts to come to an end. In fact, now we are working on mechanisms to prevent the conflicts before they happen, because they serve no one's interests and because they undermine and denigrate human dignity. When you sit and you see the images, I heard a report last week on CNN that said that there is evidence that genocide may well have been committed in Congo. That is not a good thing. It is not a good thing. We have to get to the point where we can disagree with someone else without being motivated to wipe that person's race off the face of the earth. That is not our right. It is not. And yet it seems so easy for us to fall into that trap because we're repeating the same patterns. We're repeating the same patterns. I would recommend, have you ever read the Universal Declaration on Human Rights? Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Honorable Minister, do you want to? Okay. Can we, with your permission, I know there were two young ladies whom I promised that I would give them a floor. Can we take the two ladies, then we conclude? Please, ask your question. Please, straight to the question. Don't make a statement. The floor is yours.
Good evening, honorables and the House at large. My name is Mene Bakarai, a finalist in Miss Teenage Universe Namibia. My question is directed to our minister. As it is stated that the system aims to address poverty and unemployment amongst youth, what are the measures put in place in Namibia focusing on that, the processing now? What are the measures taken to eradicate this poverty and unemployment in youth? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes? Oh, you have, oh, it's you, okay. Okay, please. Straight, don't make a statement.
Good evening, Ambassador and His Excellency, as well as the Minister. I'm the legal scholar and I'm from MIRCO. So my question is very straightforward and short. Why can't the UN put an end to the P5?
Thank you very much. Let me give the Minister and the President to answer those questions.
I'd like to answer that question. Minister, you want to go?
Thank you very much. With regard to measures to eradicate unemployment and poverty, one, you eradicate poverty when you address the social issues. Now, if you look at the appropriation bill that was passed by Parliament, the budget, more than 50% is an allocation to social sectors. Now, that is your education, your health, your child and welfare, your children welfare, your veterans, all these social sectors, so that you try to address the issue of poverty. Also, you have what you call development budget. You see, government is not an employment agency, but it creates opportunities for employment. Now, in your development budget, you have programs, projects, infrastructure development, and so forth, in order to create jobs to the private sector, which in turn then employ individuals. So this is how government try to address the issue of unemployment, the issue of poverty. Then there's an allocation also to education, because you need to empower your people to be educated. Vocational training skills. The money that government put there is for the purpose of ensuring that the youth acquire the skills to be self-sustaining, self-sufficient, to acquire the skills that they'll be able to do something on their own. That is another area. And of course, to provide them with academic skills, we have NASFAF that provides assistance to students to acquire the required skills to enter the job market. Thank you.
Yes. The young lady had a very simple and direct question. Why can't the UN get rid of the P5? It's a brilliant question. It's a brilliant question. Now we enter the real world of politics. I'll give you some homework. You're a researcher. When you get home, do some research to find out who are the P5. I'm quite sure you will discover it's not Angola, it's not Namibia, it is not Congo, it is not DRC, it is not Cameroon. Now, the P stands for permanent. They're there in perpetuity. But there's a sense in which the P also stands for privileged. They're privileged because they have a power that no one else has. And guess what? Countries behave just like human beings. Human beings run them. Those who have power and privilege are never in a hurry to give it up. That's just the way things are. It's the way power works. In fact, there are some power theories that suggest that when you're powerful, you seek more power because you have to exercise your power. And if you don't exercise it, then you are probably at increased risk of losing it. So do a little bit more research. The short answer is that there is a process devoted to Security Council reform taking place in the UN. It is a painstakingly slow process. Think why it would be slow. Okay? Think why it would be slow. But to a significant degree, a lot of focus in that process is not necessarily being given to the question as to whether the veto should be kept or not kept. Okay? So it is not, the system is not working effectively. Everyone understands where the deficiencies lie, but the prognosis suggests that this system will continue to be with us in some form for the foreseeable future.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I think in as much as we will want to continue to discuss, the President has other activities that he has to engage on, and I really seek your understanding why we have to conclude the discussions. Now, there were some questions from the online. What I'm going to do is just to read them so that when the Minister and the President conclude their remarks, they will perhaps just touch on those questions. Then from there we conclude. Are we on the same understanding? Thank you very much. Now, one question was already answered. That is the last month, the UNGA backed a Palestinian bid to become a full UN member, a move that the US and the Israeli did not favor. Elaborate this by using the relationship between Security Council and the General Assembly. I think that Mr. President has elaborated on. And then there is one, how is disarmament and non-proliferation matters embraced in the Summit of the Future and its contribution to peace and security in the future geopolitics? I think this question was also partially touched. Then the reform of the UN Security Council is long overdue. Is the UN still relevant in maintaining international peace and security during the 21st century? What are progress with regard to the reform of the UN, especially the reform of Security Council? The question is directed to the President of the General Assembly. So I think, Your Excellency and the Honorable Minister, I'm now going to give you a few minutes to conclude, and maybe you can just touch briefly on the question that were not responded to. So.
Would you like to go first, Minister? Okay. There was a question as to whether the UN is still relevant, I believe.
Yes, Mr. President.
If I say yes, you will all think, well, he has to say that, he's biased.
Maybe I say, as you answer, you also make your concluding remarks.
Yes.
Thank you.
But I have a surprise for you.
Thank you.
I am not an officer of the UN. I am not employed by the UN. I'm a diplomat from a developing country, a small developing country called Trinidad and Tobago. But we believe in the UN. And the reason we believe in the UN is because it gives place and space to all countries to come to New York and engage in debate to shape global policy that will affect your country. So you can choose not to be at the table, and if you're not there, your country's interests will be ignored. But not only that, the UN, countries like ours, we have no military arsenals. We do not have 1 million soldiers in boots. We're a small country, living at a time when there are many large, powerful countries around us. We have no enemies. We've been careful over 64 years of independence not to make any enemies. We are friends of all. And so our protection, what guarantees our existence, is international law. The law that says you cannot unilaterally overtake the territory of a sovereign state. It's illegal. It's a violation of the Charter. And so I believe the UN is most relevant. I'm going to quote Madeleine Albright. It's not my quote. Madeleine Albright, former US permanent representative to the UN, said when she was permanent rep, if the UN did not exist, we would have to create it. The UN does an enormous amount of work in the field, right here in Namibia, that many of you might not even be aware of. The resident coordinator is sitting over there. Every time I go into the field in a country, I go and visit the field offices. You cannot imagine the work that UN officers are doing across the world to lift people, to give them hope, to help them keep their children safe from predators, sometimes living next door, the predator. These things are extremely important because governments alone cannot, they do not have the capacity. They may have the commitment and the will, they do not have the capacity to do it all. That's where the UN comes in. We need it as much today as we ever did. Sure, it needs to change and modernize. We admit that. And those processes are ongoing. But there isn't another organization anywhere on this planet that does what the UN does every day of the year and gives people the hope that their lives will be better. That's what the SDGs are about. That is what the Summit of the Future is about. It's about guaranteeing you young globalists in developing countries, it's about giving you the same chances that your contemporaries in the developed North have, so that you can have at least a fighting chance at being as successful and as accomplished as they are in order to close that development gap. So, is the UN relevant? Extremely so. Do we need it? Absolutely yes. And so I challenge all of you, think about the UN. Follow its programs. Take an interest in the work that it does. You'll understand better why the world is as complicated as it is.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. We give a loud applause to the President of the General Assembly. Now I give the chance to the Honorable Dr. Peamu Shirenga, the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, to just make concluding remarks, maybe also tackling some of the questions we asked.
Thank you very much. In my concluding remarks, I'm also going to address the last question as to whether the UN is relevant. And the answer is the UN is and will continue to be relevant insofar as there's no substitute for it. An institution or organization become irrelevant when it is substituted by another. So we do not have a substitute for the UN. And when you look at the UN, as the President was saying, do not just look at the United Nations, looking at the headquarters in New York, thinking about the General Assembly and the Security Council. That is not what the UN is all about. Think of the United Nations agencies that are addressing issues of hunger in the World Food Program, issues of migration, refugees, education, children, telecommunications, postal services, and so forth. Now the question is, we just try to stop the services of all these agencies for 1 week. Then you have the answer whether the UN is relevant or not. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. I think we must say this was a very enlightening and illuminating discussions. And I have to thank all of you for accompanying me to be able to drive the discussions. The success, it is to you for assisting me. The failure, I take them as my own weakness. As the UN, as we always say that both the lion and the zebra, they go to the water to drink. Each of them had a purpose, and the purpose is the same, to quench the thirst. But the expectation is different. So let us not make the UN to be like a lion and the gazelle. So we are all going to drink the water and feel satisfied and have a fulfilling life. So with this saying, it is now my privilege to call upon Ms. Berta Makari, Director of Information Research in the Ministry of International Relations and Cooperation, MIRCO, to give a vote of thanks.
Thank you, Director of Ceremony, Ambassador Shanika, Honorable Dr. Pea Mushelenga, Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Your Excellency, Ambassador Dennis Francis, President of the 78th Session of the United Nations General Assembly, permit me to stand by the protocol already observed. My task is simple but equally important. As it was mentioned, my name is Bertha Makali. I'm the Director of Information and Research, responsible for public diplomacy in the Ministry of International Relations and Cooperation, and also the chairperson of the Dr. Theo-Ben Gurirab Lecture Series Organizing Committee. Thank you for braving this weather. Luckily, it's not very cold today, and taking time to participate this evening in the 20th edition of the Dr. Theo-Ben Gurirab Lecture Series to interrogate the theme, Summit of the Future, that will be co-facilitated by Namibia and Germany during the 79th session of the UN General Assembly this year in September. The lecture series highlighted a significance of the Summit of the Future and how it is expected to forge a new international consensus for the international community. In particularly, the world leaders are expected to pledge their commitments and how to deliver a better present and safeguard the future. The discussion also underscored how the Summit of the Future will find consensus on multilateral solutions to comprehensively address areas such as global shocks, youth, people's involvement, while advocating for women empowerment, human progress measurements, digital technology, among others. In this regard, on behalf of the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, I wish to express my sincere gratitude to His Excellency Dennis Francis, President of the 78th Session of the United Nations General Assembly, and his esteemed team who arrived in Namibia in June, to specifically address us Namibians from all walks of life of the importance of sustainable development, and also to brief us on the progress made thus far in negotiations of the Summit of the Future. Your Excellency, your contributions are highly appreciated. Thank you. Similarly, I would like to thank the Honorable Dr. Pea Mushelenga, Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, for the valuable insights on the Sustainable Development Goals and in unpacking the theme of the lecture series, and also explaining how does Namibia stand to benefit from the co-facilitating of this summit, and thus Namibia will, of course, be given sort of a high global visibility. I thank you, Honorable, for that. Equally so, I would like to thank Ambassador Penda Nanda, the Executive Director and the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, for the warm welcome remarks for our 20th Dr. Theo-Ben Gurirab Lecture Series, and also for emphasizing the point that the theme of this summit speaks to Namibia's aspiration for youth engagement and empowerment. Thank you, Edie. I would like to thank the members of the Diplomatic Corps and for taking time from their busy schedule to be with us this evening. We thank you, Your Excellency, for your presence. Additionally, I would like to thank Ms. Joan Guriras, the spouse of the late Dr. Theo-Ben Gurirab, of whom the Dr. Theo-Ben Gurirab Lecture Series is named. Ms. Guriras, thank you very much for your continuous support. Thank you. I also want to thank Dr. Errol Namab, the Vice Chancellor of NAST, and the NAST management for availing this beautiful auditorium to ensure that our event is successful, and also the NAS staff for their cooperation during the preparation of this lecture. I extend thanks to the students who are here from NAST, UNAM, and IUM for their valuable engagement. Furthermore, I wish to extend our heartfelt thanks to all our participants gathering in this auditorium, not forgetting our social media audiences who participated by posting questions and following the lecture on various platforms. Thank you very much. Your contributions to the discussion on this important theme make the lecture series truly memorable for us. Many thanks goes to our NBC, Namibian Broadcasting Corporation, for their partnership with our ministry to ensure that the nation is educated and informed about the foreign policy of Namibia. We highly appreciate you. Thank you, NBC. In addition, let me thank the staff of the ministry under the leadership of our ambassador, Pendananda, our ED, the heads of departments and directorates, and the Dr. Theo-Ben Gurirab Lecture Series Committee for their hard work and teamwork for making this 20th Dr. Theo-Ben Gurirab Lecture Series a huge success. And finally, I just want to extend my thanks to everyone for participating in this lecture. And I wish all of you the best. And those who are traveling, I wish you traveling mercy. I thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bertha Makari, for the vote of thanks. It was enlightening. May I now request all of us to stand up for the anthems that will be in revised order.
Namibia.